Hello everyone, Kate from the Narrate team here. This weekend entitled Calling All Owners could very well be named Calling All Older Brothers. Adam speaks from the book of Luke, bringing a fresh insight to the parable of the prodigal son. It gives us a unique understanding into what it means to be part of a community.
Top of the morning. Weekends like this remind me of how fun it is to work with all of our team and volunteers and wowzers. And since all the silliness is done, I'm just going to jump into the text. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arm around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of his servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you're always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to go celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" There's a question that I'd like to start this morning with, and it's just simply this. Which brother are you? Or in the words of someone from our tech team, "Oh brother, which art thou?" Pretty clever, right? Which brother are you? Because, see, the way parables work and what made Jesus such a masterful teacher was his use of parables. And what Jesus' audience would have originally done, what they would have instantly done, was they would have placed themselves inside the story. They know that to really appreciate the story, you're in it. What makes it so difficult is there was a context, and in the context, when the story's heard, you would have instantly understood which brother you were. And so I ask, which brother are you? It's kind of like, those of you that have little kids, you know how when you watch a movie, and many of you probably did this when you were a kid, you can't just watch Lord of the Rings, you have to be one of the characters. Do you know that? I was watching my boys watch Lord of the Rings the other day, and I don't know how they did this, but each of them were 2 characters each, and they were arguing about which character who was. It's kind of, for me, growing up, it was playing Tecmo Bowl. Remember that one? Like the best video game ever, and then Super Tecmo Bowl came out, and it was like, boom, your head exploded, because it doesn't get any better than that. I was always one of the players. Do you remember that? And so let me ask you, which brother are you? And let me warn you, part of what makes Jesus' parables so brilliant is they're tricky. Because what happens is instantly you identify with one of the characters, and yet the trick of it is the one that you most quickly identify with isn't often the one that you are. Like, that's the point of the parable, is to get you. It's kind of like a good boxer. We got you leaning left, leaning left, leaning left, and then bam, now we've got you. That's what he's doing. And so let me just kind of ask you, which brother are you? Pick it. And then let me also warn you, I'll bet you when we wrap up this morning, the one that you thought you were, and I'll bet you this would be common for most of us, the one that we think we are isn't actually the one that we are. And so let's kind of maybe provide some context, and perhaps this will help. See, there was a younger brother, and as is the case with younger brothers, and as is the case with young people, he came to this realization that his parents were idiots. They were old-fashioned, they were bigoted, they didn't really know what they were talking about, their ways wouldn't work in the modern times. I mean, stuff you guys never did, I know, but these guys back then, they had these attitudes towards their parents and their ways. And so he goes to his father and he says, I don't want you, I want what you offer, which is a pattern. And it's a pattern we have with our parents, it's a pattern we have with God. I don't want relationship with you, I just want the benefits of what you have. And of course, there's a trick in this culture because there are no Roth IRAs, that there aren't no bank accounts. Like wealth isn't stored in the form of gold in a corner somewhere. Wealth is stored in the form of land and animals and implements. And so the theme that's going on here is he's saying to his father, Father, I want my share of what's going to be mine when you're dead. And in fact, I'm going to take that share. I'm going to cash it out. I'm going to go to a distant land. And what that means is there'll be one less person living off this land, but the whole land will have to, but what's left will have to support the whole entourage of people. See, there's this embedded selfishness that's part of the story. And so the father probably sold land that, like, he didn't even know the name of the guy who originally acquired it. Maybe it goes all the way back to the crossing of the Jordan. But he's selling his family's land. And if you have a ranching, farming background, you can begin to appreciate what's going on here. And he goes off and he goes to university. And he's got lots of money, so he doesn't have to worry about grades. And he's got lots of money, and so he doesn't have to worry about being likable, because it's easy to just pay people off. And he can get girls even if he's not likable enough to get girls, if you know what I mean, because he can just purchase them. And he has some of the best parties and lives some of the best life. And then, as is the case that happens, the resource dries up and the land, the economy starts to dry up, and so he's in trouble. And he begins in this season, around 24 years old perhaps, to realize that maybe his parents aren't such idiots. That maybe some of their ideas, though maybe old-fashioned, are ideas that actually work. And he begins to contemplate returning to his father. But as Tim Keller, those of you that want to delve deeper into what we're going to wrestle with this morning, Tim Keller wrote a brilliant book called The Prodigal God. It is remarkable and relatively short. But as he points out, that the culture would have been that in order for him to become a son again, he would have to come up with a third to pay his dad back. He'd have to come back up with that resource to not just pay his dad back, but perhaps to even somehow buy the land, which if you've ever played Monopoly, they might want twice as much as you paid for it originally. And so he gives up all hope of ever being a son again, but his thinking is, maybe I can go be an apprentice and I can learn a skill and I can eke out an existence. And yeah, there's a distant chance that I'll be able to buy back my sonship, but at least I'll be able to be around the only place on the planet where there's people who actually love me for me. And so he makes his way back home, and much to his shock and dismay, the moment he becomes visible to his father runs to him, something Eastern men don't do, something Western men don't do, and greets him and puts a ring on his finger and a robe over his shoulders and kills the fattened calf and has a party. And it's this perfect, almost Disney-esque story because it just ends and there's resolution. But the story, it turns out, isn't over because there's an older brother, and the older brother is the faithful brother. The older brother is the one that wasn't getting MIPs in high school, and the older brother is the one that wasn't doing stupid things that cost his parents money, and the older brother is the one that's watched his brother his entire life just cost his parents things, and he's been buying his parents like boundaries books and sending them to seminars and going like, you got to figure this thing out. And he returns from the field because he's working. I mean, there's some irony. And he hears a party. And he asks, what's going on? And they say, that brother of yours, he's back. And so they're partying. And I think he has the same emotional response any of us who are prone to jealousy and insecurity would have. He's livid. And then he does something that's no accident. This, again, gets into the historical context that guys like Tim Keller do a good job with. See, he could have just not went. But that would only be a statement to himself. Instead, he places himself by the door of the party, something akin to not attending a wedding ceremony. Ever done that? Or worse, is that a part of your family story? Lots of us probably have that in our family stories where somebody didn't go, and it wasn't that they couldn't afford the flight, and it wasn't that they were ill, it was that was their way of showing disapproval. And so the older brother stands next to the door, and what he is doing in no uncertain terms is making it clear to everybody there that he's not at work, his wife's not ill, he's not away for work, he doesn't approve. See, every person that walks by him is assured that his vote is a vote of no confidence in the Father's leadership. Funny how both sides have their own way of betraying and ridiculing and humiliating the Father. And the Father hears that this is going on, and he goes outside. Now, there's lots of ways that the Son could greet the Father, but he doesn't pick any of them. Any of you watched the game yesterday between Japan and South Korea, the Little League baseball game? If you did, you might have noticed that every time the coach for the Japanese team visited the pitcher's mound, the entire infield would come to the pitcher's mound as well. Not all that uncommon at that age. But did you notice every kid on the team did something? They all took off their hats. Like in that culture, when the coach is talking, you show some respect and you express it by taking off your hat, something akin to maybe the Southern culture with sir and ma'am. Us in the Northwest, we don't have any words because we're the informal bunch. He could have said lots of things. There's culturally lots of things he should have said, but he opened with simply one word: look. No greeting. He greeted him like he would a criminal or an enemy or just an everyday friend. Look. And then did you notice? He couldn't even find it within himself to refer to his brother as a brother. He had already emotionally detached. It was this son of yours. See, I have no connection to him, but this son of yours, why is he so mad? See, we can spiritualize it, we can emotionalize it, but there's actually a real fiscal reason for why he's so angry. See, he's done the math. He says, this son of yours, he's squandered a third of it, and now he's back. I've been faithful. I've been working. This costs me money. Because see, to take his third, like we have a third of a pie, we give the younger son a third of the pie, the younger son cashes out, leaves all of us to live now on 2/3, and for generations we'll have to live on 2/3, and we'll have to look at neighbor Ed, who now has all of our land, and that ticks us off. And he gets to go, and he liquidates it, and he blows it, and he comes back, and then we've made him a son again. So we have 2/3 of the ranch that we once had, but there's 2 sons. So what just happened to the older son's inheritance? It just shrunk, because the younger son's entitled to a third, just like any son was entitled to a third. He's furious because the fattened calf for him is a symbol. It's a symbol of a financial cost that he long ago chose he wasn't willing to pay, and now his hand is being forced because the Father's done it for him. And the question becomes, what's the Father's response going to be? To which the Father essentially says, listen, you're my son. Yeah, I get you've been faithful. I get that you're the star. I get you're the one we can rely upon. I get all of that. But he's your son too. And he needed a little more attention than you did. And yeah, sometimes he misses my grace, and sometimes you do too, because you think you earn it. But could you just swallow your pride? Could you make room for more? Could you join the party? And then Jesus does the most annoying thing, kind of like that movie Friday Night Lights a few years ago. It just ends. Ever notice that? Like the story just, there's no resolution, no conclusion. It just ends. And I think to really get at, like, what is Jesus getting at in the parable? And even who's it for? You've got to look at the fact that it didn't end. See, we often call this, in your Bible probably, in the little writing above it, says the prodigal son. But is the story about the prodigal son? It seems like anybody who's watched a couple Disney films would know, no. This story is about the older son. Okay, maybe it's about both as well as the father. But if it's only about one, it's about the older brother. Because that's where we lack resolution. And in fact, if we look into the context, in Luke chapter 15, the first verse, so this parable picks up in verse 11, but in verse 1 it says this: now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. So Luke is telling his own story as he remembers this moment, and he starts it by saying, so all these younger brothers, these ones who rejected the morality, these ones who said their parents were idiots, these Jews who went off and did crazy things, now they're returning back to God. They're gathering around Jesus, and Jesus is accepting them. But then the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So Jesus' audience in the telling of the story consists of 2 people, younger brothers and older brothers. And the younger brothers are partying and have a good time and minding their own business. And the older brothers say, wait. Why are you partying with the younger brothers? And verse 3 says this: then Jesus told them this parable. See, many a scholar would argue this parable is directed at the Pharisees. And what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees is, you guys, please rethink your approach right now. I understand you're threatened by the younger brothers. I understand you're frustrated because you've been the faithful Jews. You've upheld the law. You've been the one worshiping me all along. You're the one that have been paying your tithes. I understand all that. I understand how frustrating it is and even devaluing it is to have this younger brother show up and all of a sudden he gets all the attention. But could we just put it all in perspective, please? See, the reason the story ends without resolution is because the story had no resolution. The point of the story was Jesus looking at the Pharisees and saying, what kind of older brother are you going to be? Will you swallow your pride? Will you make room for these others? Will you understand that they too have a place in God's heart? And I suppose every parent with divided children can begin to relate on a little bit deeper level to what's going on here. What's fascinating to me even more about this parable, and just to be clear, I don't think of this stuff, I just read it and steal it. But it's actually the third parable in a list of 3. See, there's 3 parables, and some of you who your eyes already rolled back in your head because you've heard this story taught so many times, like just return to the auditorium with me for just 5 minutes, will you? See, Jesus says, and then he told them this parable, and then there's 3. The first one is about a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one went missing. And Jesus says, quite logically, that shepherd left the 99 and he went and found the one. And then he tells a second parable. It's a parable about a woman who had 10 silver coins. And she lost one. And quite logically, she set the 9 aside and she ripped the house to shreds trying to find the missing coin. So he's talking to the Pharisees, remember. You guys. Oh, and in case you don't get it, let me tell one more, he says. There's this father who had 2 sons, and one of the sons went off and lived wildly, and he had an older son. And the third story, what doesn't happen? No one goes looking. Whose job was it to go looking? It was the older brothers. I read a story this week about a brother during the Vietnam War whose younger brother went missing. And he was deeply dissatisfied at the answers he was getting back from the military and the government about the whereabouts of his younger brother. And so you know what he did? He booked a ticket to Asia. He made his way to Vietnam. And he literally walked the countryside. They say he walked through both camps. He interacted with Vietnamese people and American people, Vietnamese soldiers and American soldiers, and nobody touched him. Perhaps before the age of ransom, I'm not sure. But there was such respect for what the older brother was doing that he wasn't sitting around and just waiting for the younger brother to show up, that he went looking for him, that nobody touched him. See, there was a younger brother who went missing, Jesus says, and no one's looking for him. And guys, it's as if he's saying, who do you suppose should be the ones looking for him? And there's this, gotcha, it's you, he's saying to them. So let me ask you, which brother are you? And what if, and I want to be gentle here, but what if you're not the prodigal? See, I think what happens to me, I would suspect, is what happens to you. You read this story and you identify with the grace of God and you identify with your own brokenness and you identify with your own history of rebellion and your own history of self-discovery, and you recognize that there was this God, many of you who follow Jesus, this is your story. But what if it was your story 15 years ago? What if it was 30 years ago that you were the prodigal? What if it was 6 months ago that you were the prodigal? And that doesn't change God's grace. But what if we all have this tendency to want to be the younger brother, and yet Jesus' story hinges upon who's willing to be the older brother? Who's willing to pay the costs associated with finding the younger brother? Who's willing to go? Maybe Jesus' message to the Pharisees was, you guys, there's a natural trajectory by which prodigal sons walk. And it's they walk from one of being like saved despite themselves to privileged in no time. Who's willing to be the older brother? Maybe we could say it this way. For younger brothers to be found, older brothers must foot the bill. See, one of the criticisms of this parable is often that the younger son's forgiveness came cheaply. So some will use it to preach and communicate what they would call a cheap gospel, which simply recognizes that the son, all he had to do was return, and there was no cost to anyone. All he had to do was sit himself back under the love of God, and everything was hunky-dory again. But is that true? Was the son's being found really free? Was it really costless? No, it was actually quite costly. It didn't cost him, but it cost someone. It cost his older brother. And in fact, that's what he's ticked about. Because he had decided long ago, I'm sitting tight. I'm just watching the war from this little spot right here. I don't want anything to do with this thing. What if younger brothers being found? What if people stepping into the grace of God? What if it's expensive? What if making Jesus as accessible as possible to as many people as possible costs a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money? And yet the trick is it often costs the ones being found nothing. It's the older brothers who have grown into their role as older brothers. See, we call this weekend Calling All Owners. It's part of why, in our own sarcastic kind of way, we wanted to say thanks to those of you who have been older brothers, some of you for the last 5 years as we come up on our 5th birthday. But calling all owners is a simple observation that in Narrate, we don't have members. It's a question that I get often. What's your membership process? Well, legally we have members. It's called, welcome, you're a member. You're sitting in the seat. We don't, because members have privileges. We have owners. Because owners, they take responsibility. And something we'll talk a lot more about on Vision Weekend is we've set out to plant a church that feels like a church plant perpetually. And part of the reason why we're so passionate about not even owning a place isn't because we think churches who own buildings are a bad thing. It's because we want to live in the tension of if there aren't enough people who own the mission and the vision of what we think God is trying to do through us, then we probably shouldn't exist anyway. And so every last Sunday in August, we do Calling All Owners. And it's a chance for owners to opt out. And it's a chance for owners to opt in. Because to be the kind of place that re-engages people in a community unique and beautiful as Helena is requires people skiing a few less Saturdays. Because once a month or so, we like to scatter. And scattering for us is about making a tangible difference in our community, especially for those who are the biggest critics of Jesus. Scattering for us is about a God who calls us in Genesis to be culture makers, a God who says, grace is my thing, common grace is great. And scattering on Saturdays is about re-engaging our community who long ago became disillusioned with our message and causing them to scratch our head. I was talking to my friend Brad this week, who is really involved from a scattering project and with the city, and he was telling me a story of a time when he returned to his house. He lives in, I won't tell you where he lives. Well, it doesn't matter. He lives in Elliston, and he just put a new screen door up, and he got back to his house, and there was a tracked rubber banded to the handle of his screen door, and the screen door hadn't been latched, and so it was in smithereens, beat up by the wind as it pounded against the railing in the house. Now, you can have your own comment about that. The irony of that wasn't lost upon me. See, Calling All Owners is about people who go like, we're going to scatter, and we're going to cause people to wonder about this Jesus because suddenly our agenda looks different than the one that they grew up rejecting. And Calling All Owners is about a people who understand that to create gatherings like this where people can leave engaged and challenged, particularly where people who don't like church in the first place actually enjoy attending, that involves a lot of work. It's my friend Teresa who rolled in at 7 o'clock this morning, not my wife Teresa, a different one, to run a vacuum cleaner that makes her look like a Ghostbuster because we just think it respects God when you sit in seats where there aren't popcorn kernels underneath your feet. It involves people who show up and help set up the kids area because it's not childcare. And we share space with this great theater, and they're messy, as they should be. And so it involves a crew showing up and setting them up. It involves a band who many of them play twice a month, which means on Thursday they're at the studio from 5:30 to 9-ish, and then they roll in here, and they have to be ready to play by 7 a.m. And if they walk out by 1, that was kind of a short morning for them, or at least a normal one. And those people don't get paid. It involves people like Eli at our tech booth and those running sound and lights and video back there who once or twice a month go, yeah, I'll give up my entire morning just to click a button. It might seem insignificant while you're doing it, and yet you know as much as I how much clicking the wrong button at the wrong time can change the experience. It involves people who show up, and actually they're not just going to attend one gathering, they're going to attend 2. You know why? Because they understand that for Narrate Kids to be great, it's going to involve great people who love to teach kids about God and Jesus and his agenda, who love to shape those experiences, who work just as hard down there as we do up here. And so they're going to, a couple times a month, show up, and they're going to teach one, or they're going to check kids in at one, or they're going to change diapers at one, and then they're going to attend another one. It involves people who during the week hang out with our middle school and high school students, just trying to reinforce to students that there are actually people who follow Jesus and know what they're talking about. That to reinforce the message that parents are already saying to them, to help kids who aren't churched just take one step closer to engaging Jesus. It involves people who, at the 11:30, who stick around for an extra 45 minutes because we've added a third gathering. You might have noticed. By the way, there's a few more seats before and after this one. But we still have to be out of here by 1 o'clock. And to make that transition to 3 gatherings involved us creating what we call a teardown team. So calling out owners is really about this. And I would just actually ask all of you to grab that chair in front of, behind, or on your feet. We know it's a dysfunctional system that hips and things knock them to the floor. Guys, this isn't about shame. This isn't about guilt. This isn't about cajoling. This isn't about any of that. It's about purpose. It's about following a God who doesn't just invite you to know him and then somehow stay interested until you die, but a God who says, come lose yourself in my story. Do something as simple as setting up a kids area for 45 minutes and you see what happens. And just to be clear, every one of those little numbers, those all represent actual people, like wholes. So we just recognize all of us are busy, none of us are looking for things to do, and so in no uncertain terms we said to the team, like, we don't want your dream, we don't want your vision team, we want, like, for you to give all your volunteers the experience that they should have, and for us to give our people who are guests and regulars the experience they should have. How many people does it take? And those numbers represent that. And some of you are going, thank you for this, I'm going to take it home and pray over it. Good news, we already prayed over it, so you don't have to. Just encourage you, as you walk out the door this morning, take a chance. Let one of our staff members engage you and see if you can find a God who says this older brother gig, it's not supposed to be arduous, it's supposed to be remarkable. We've got a video for you that maybe puts this in better words. Some of your older brothers, and you're tired, to which I say, good job. I think that's the point. Now I understand we all have to navigate burnout, but I think being the point is tired. I think being the point is giving of yourself. Some of you are your older brothers and you're contemplating getting off a team or maybe even giving a little less. And can I just remind you that the most difficult thing in the kingdom of God is to finish stronger than you started. And the trajectory of Jesus is more, not less. And so we very authentically say thank you, and we also say, stay engaged. Some of you are older brothers, and you disengaged months or maybe years ago. Maybe you disengaged before you ever showed up at Narrate, and part of what we're proud to do is create a context where you can recover. But it's time to get back in the game. And when you started seeing new speakers and you went, clearly they don't need my money anymore, I'll give it someplace that does. Could I just challenge that? And say we need you in the game. We are a community that's committed to only being as good as we have engaged constituents. Like by design. We'll just kind of crumble if we don't have a high degree of engagement from everybody. And that's the way we like it. And some of you, you're new older brothers. In the last year, in the last couple years, in the last few months even, you've found the prodigal God. The one who in simultaneous terms says, you're not good enough, but I am. You're broken, but that's not the point. And for you, the challenge is, are you going to self-identify as a prodigal for the rest of your life? Because listen, that's the culture. It's all about you. And it's not the call of the church. It's as we talked about last week, why AA is so brilliant when they say, when you don't need us, we need you. See, the challenge for you who are new older brothers, if you will, is will you go about creating a context and an experience and a movement and a church that was the type of church to engage and reach you? Or will you just take the benefits and go live a great Christian life and we'll high five in heaven? And some of you really are prodigals. And man, I hope that what you're discovering is the gospel. And the gospel, please hear this, the gospel is not people getting saved. The gospel is Jesus is king of the universe. That's the gospel. The gospel is when Jesus walked out of that tomb, history turned a corner. And if that in fact happened, everything else is different. God is king. That's why Herod was so threatened on Christmas Eve. Because if he was king, then everything else is different. And so, we get saved because of that. But it's way bigger than any one of us, quote unquote, getting saved. The gospel is Jesus is king. And when you embrace that and believe in that same power that rose him from the dead, not figuratively, but literally, now works in you, in your marriage, in your finances, in your occupation, in your purpose. And it compels you to transition from being a prodigal to being an elder. To saying the purpose of my life is now officially bigger than me.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.